Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking the first episode of the long-awaited Legends of Tomorrow. And in general, I liked the show, but it does sort of suffer a little bit from the usual first episode, a lot of the usual first episode problems. And the biggest problem it suffers from is it sort of like just basically tries to throw everybody together in the first like 10 to 15 minutes of the show. Now, as I understand it, this pilot episode is kind of split over two parts. So I imagine if you watch the two parts together, it's not quite as bad. But when you only have the one episode, the 1 hour, it's rather jarring. And it just seems a little funny that the characters didn't really put up a little bit more resistance to this whole idea than they did. I mean, the only one who has some serious reservations about this whole situation is Jax, and he ends up having to be getting kidnapped into this whole situation. And the one thing that really kind of gets me about Captain Cold and Heatwave is Snart's like, oh man, imagine if we stole the Mona Lisa right from Leonardo da Vinci's easel. Well, the reason one of the Mona Lisa is incredibly valuable is because people have been studying it and saying how awesome it is for hundreds of years. I mean, granted, if something turned up that was made by Leonardo da Vinci today, it would doubtlessly be worth a lot of money, but not the same as if you just frickin' stole the Mona Lisa and sold it to some ridiculously rich but shady art collector. So, I mean, he makes a lot more sense with, say, the Hope Diamond, but still, that kind of seems a little bit of questionable logic here. Also, you would kind of be changing some major stuff in terms of culture and history. But then again, I guess Snart probably doesn't care too awful much about that. But I do like how it is pointed out that leaving two guys like that on a time machine alone would be a bad idea. But Gideon seems pretty in control of things, and it's not like either of them is known to be a skilled hacker. I mean, obviously, Captain Cold is rather technically adept when it comes to his cold gun, but anywho. Now, one thing that I do like about this pilot episode is that despite it getting the ball rolling perhaps a little too quickly, it also does get the two biggest questions that anybody watching this is going to have. One is why these guys? And there's the line that Rip Hunter sells them, and then there's what we ultimately find out to be the truth is that these are people that never caused any real huge impact in the timeline. And that's, of course, the explanation to, well, why doesn't Rip just go back in time and grab like Batman or something? I even heard some guy was like, why don't they just get effing Superman on Twitter? I'm like, well, okay, because legally they can't do that in terms of rights and stuff. But that is, of course, the logical question. And Rip Hunter's comment about, I've seen Men of Steel die in Dark Knight's Fall. Well, that basically all but spells out that yes, in some form, Superman and Batman, and possibly the related characters like Superboy, Supergirl, Nightwing, whatever, exist in the Arrowverse. I mean, not a huge surprise. We've seen more than a few nods to Batman over the years, and a few to Superman. But still, it's sort of nice to have that confirmation for whatever it's worth. But of course, those are two people who have enormous impacts on the timeline. So it does make sense to kind of grab some people who would not fall into that category. Of course, it also sort of says some rather disappointing things about what the futures were for people like Ray and Sarah, Jax, and Martin. Um, but whatever. We exactly what defines as minimum is kind of debatable. And one can imagine that maybe in the original timeline, Vandal Savage just did succeed in killing Carter and Kendra, once again. Sarah, when we see her, is just drinking herself blind. Ray has already said that, hey, I died and the world didn't care. It's a little disappointing considering the enormous potential that's going on that happens with Stein and Jax, but c'est la vie, right? So, and of course, Heatwave and Captain Cold, well, they're just only interested in stealing and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's kind of understandable that they might not have a huge lasting impact in history. And we do kind of have to get the elephant out of the room that, yeah, we got Arthur Darvill playing Rick Hunter, and of course he next to John Barrowman is the most established Doctor Who alum to come over to the CW. And of course, we've got Alex Kingston and the fellow who played Walter Steele. But still, I mean, this is no small thing. And of course, with his Doctor Who background, well, fans have been making jokes about that for a very long time. And I think that'll always be there. But in a lot of ways, the Time Masters are kind of do have a very Doctor Who aspect to them in some degree, which when we actually got to see the Time Masters, yeah, I doubt I was the only person who was reminded of the Time Lords of Gallifrey. And no doubt the CW is playing that up. I mean, it would be kind of dumb not to. And as long as they don't go too crazy with it, I don't think the fans are going to mind, and I sort of doubt that Arthur Darvill will either. Now, Rip himself is obviously they're kind of taking some different making him a little bit different than in the comics. I mean, in the comics, he's more or less portrayed as an American here. He's British. To the best of my knowledge, he doesn't have a family. Children, a wife or child in the comics. Now, who his father is, if you're familiar with the comics, that's quite a big deal. But we'll see. Spoiler, in the comics, his father is Booster Gold. But that's something that's been known for a long time. So, what the hell? Let's just kind of get it out there. Because we're probably going to want to talk about that at some point. I did like how they did use the opening sequence to sort of help feed into what would become Rip's backstory later. And of course, it sort of reminds us that, oh yeah, Vandal Savage is a real bad dude. I mean, he whips out a gun and shoots a kid right in the face. I mean, ouch. But on the other hand, we also get to what little we do get to see of Rip's wife and son show that hey, these were they were good people, strong and brave people, people who were trying to do the right thing. In a really it's little stuff, but enough to make us sort of feel upset that Savage killed people who were willing to stand up for them, even if they were children. And I do have to say they mentioned that it's the second Blitz, and of course, if you're familiar with British history, you're well aware of when the first one was. So that was a nice little touch. Other stuff. I do like the idea that they've taken the rather complicated idea of the character of Wave Rider for the comics and just simplified it to that's the name of his ship. Now, they've apparently, like within the New 52, done some more complicated things with Wave Rider or post Convergence. Like, I can't fricking keep up with what the hell is going on in DC anymore. Seriously, I haven't read a DC book on a regular basis in years. And it's not that I don't like this DC. I've never been a person who chose sides in the DC Marvel war. I was always reading titles from both companies. But DC is just constantly this enormous state of what in the hell is actually canon now, which is enormously. It's been that way for years. It's enormously turned me off. So I haven't been reading any DC titles on a regular basis for quite some time. But anyway, I'm also I'm also kind of wondering, like, okay, on the Flash, they basically they flat out said that Barry Allen is the one that invents Gideon, or at least the Gideon that was used by the Reverse Flash. First of all, when the hell was Barry ever a computer programmer? And it's also kind of implied by that TV show that he does that sometime between now and like the time the show started and 10 years into the future. So like why are they still 150 years in the future using an AI invented like more than a century ago? I mean, where I used to live in South Korea, they were still basically running the country on Internet Explorer 6 until like late last year. So I can understand some old tech lingering around, but yeah. And by running the country, I mean the government computers. Just so we're clear. And incidentally, Gideon is no longer voiced by here on the show by Morena Baccarin, who is of course did the voice of the Flash, and of course plays Leslie Tompkins on Gotham. Not sure if she was just not available when they needed this to be recorded, or if there's some in universe reason for this. We'll have to see. Anyway, the show is, as I said, pretty fun once they get the ball rolling. A little disappointed that when they step outside to go to the 1970s, the guy they don't immediately make a little bit more of an effort to blend in clothing wise. I mean, we've seen from the previews that that's coming. And what really gets me though is Sarah feels the need to change out of her clothes and put on the white canary costume, even though she's wearing jeans and a turtleneck. And like I am wearing now, actually, a turtleneck, is that would if she was the only one there who was dressed so that she was walking around on the streets in the 1970s, she wouldn't attract a huge amount of notice. I mean, I guess you could also say sort of the same was true for Heatwave and Captain Cold. Just sort of, rather generic looking guys with somewhat grubby looking clothes. Although the only real thing there is Saint Roque is supposed heavily implied to be somewhere in Louisiana in the DC universe. So two guys walking around in coats like that in Louisiana in what looks to be like spring or summer, that would catch some notice. But I suppose that's nitpicking to an excessive degree. But whatever, the whole scene at the bar that was pretty hilarious. I definitely did like that one. Let's see. And again, nothing really huge to say about the whole Jax and Stein thing. Just I do like how they very quickly resolve that whole "Hey, you kidnapped me" thing, and that bit with them both saying, I like being part of a team. I mean, it was a little cheesy, a little over the top, but it worked. Now talking about Carter and Kendra, I do like that. Kendra is still kind of finding her way in this whole situation, which is perfectly reasonable. And she even points out, like, hey, it wasn't that long ago that I thought I was just a barista. And the idea of them fighting, like physically fighting, in order to resolve this issue, that was cute. I liked that. It's very in keeping with my understanding of these characters. And I really did like that the professor turned out to be their son from a previous incarnation. And it does sort of make sense that yeah, these are two people that loved each other. If they were lucky enough that it took Vandal Savage a decent amount of time to find them in a particular incarnation, that they might have a family is an interesting idea. And the idea that some of their legacy from other incarnations might be something that they would run across, that would be pretty cool. And here, meeting their son, I mean, that provides a definite moment for Kendra to sort of really latch onto things, make it even more personal with Vandal Savage, with him dying. I mean, he was destined to die, but here he died because he was shot. Before, well, there was nothing to suggest that his death was violent. He might have just had a heart attack or something. But it definitely does bring that very personal moment to what's going on here in this episode. It really, again, reinvests the characters and their conflict with Vandal Savage on a personal level. Now, Rip Hunter lying about the whole thing. That's something I have to say I did see coming. And yeah, I wasn't really wild about that, but that did make it possible for them to bring in Kronos. Now, Kronos here, I mean, I do like they point out, like, he looks an awful lot like a Star Wars character. Now, in the comics, Kronos is just simply your average time-traveling bad guy who wants to rule time and space. Reinventing him as this sort of time traveling bounty hunter is actually a pretty interesting idea in my book. But I don't really have a huge Kronos isn't a character I know super well, so I don't really have a huge amount to say about him. Um, let's see here. Just trying to think if there's anything that I forgot to mention. Oh yeah, one thing. Before they take off, did you guys notice that Martin Stein just sort of leaves his car in that vacant lot? I mean, yes, I know Time Machine, you can run away all you like and still be home in time for tea, but I'm like, dude, maybe just in case it doesn't work out that way, you should call your wife and have her come pick up the car. Just saying, man, you probably don't want to leave your car sitting in a vacant lot. I also liked when Kronos meets the dude bros. He takes a second to sort of check, like say, like, are you guys in any way important to the timeline? No, and then he just goes and kills them. There's actually a Spider-Man 2099 comic that I read last year where they basically had a character, a time traveling bad guy, and that was exactly the same thing that he did. So I mean, I don't think anybody at the show is sort of ripping off that comic. It's just sort of an amusing coincidence in my book. So let's see. Yes. We also got a nice little nod to the comics, particularly like Justice Society, when Rip Hunter is talking about the would-be world conquerors of the past, like Julius Caesar and Hitler, and he mentions uh, Per Degaton, or however the hell you say that. And this is a character from the comics who basically another time traveling would be time and space ruler. Not a character I know super well. The last thing I remember him was him teaming up with Black Beetle and was it Despero, I think it was, or something like that. I don't really remember the story very well. I think if I remember right, it was in Booster Gold, which was when I was reading, it was actually pretty good series. But yeah, he is a character from the comics, and it's sort of nice that they did throw that mention of him in there. And yeah, I mean, the show suffers from two big problems, as I said. It tries to get everything rolling within like the first 10 minutes, and this is a story that's very much seems like it was meant to be watched over 2 hours, and splitting it into one seriously hurts it. Um, and I know it's a silly little thing, but I like that bit at the end where Vandal Savage gets his hands on that nuke, and we see CCCP written on it, which is of course how you write the USSR in Russian. And just as somebody who remembers life before the end of the Cold War, that amuses me probably more than it should. But I got a kick out of that nonetheless. So at the end of the day, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more zip from this show, but as I have repeatedly said in my reviews, it always takes new shows 3, 4, maybe 5 episodes to really find their feet. I mean, go back, for example, and watch like the first 5 episodes of Arrow, and then compare it to where the show is by the end of season 1. There's an enormous improvement in the quality of just about everything. And this is one of those things, it's just inevitable. There's like, it's basically something that no show can really get around because it just takes everybody time to really find that right groove for what they're going for. It's really just basically one of those things that's unavoidable in television. And it's not really, in my book, a super huge flaw that we can hold against any show. So, with that said, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, subscribe, and of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.